Hey now, Brawlers, it's time for another Board Game Brawl review with Nick Minahan, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com. Hey folks, today we're going to take a look at the newest expansion for T.I.M.E Stories from Space Cowboys, and that is called A Prophecy of Dragons. Now, of course, if you know anything about T.I.M E Stories, and if you don't, by the way, I should hopefully have some links in the corner of your screen and also in the description section that lead you to my review of T.I.M E Stories, spoiler-free review, I might add, and a non-spoiler-free review of the first expansion, the Marcy case. But if you know anything about T.I.M E Stories, you know that spoilers are a really big deal. Once you play through an adventure of T.I.M E Stories, it pretty much ruins it for you as far as playing it again, at least in the near future. So, of course, doing a review is kind of difficult. And the last time for the Marcy case, what I decided to do was just do a totally spoiler review, meaning that the only people who should watch it were people that have already played through the adventure. I'm doing something a little bit different this time, as per the title of this episode. Basically, if you just want to know if this is any good, which you might care about if perhaps you've played T.I.M E Stories before and the first two adventures didn't really do anything for you and you want to see if this one's a bit different, or if you're new to the whole thing and you just want to get an idea of how good each of these different mods is, then the first part of this review is for you. No spoilers, just talking about the game in a very general way, only talking about the information that's specifically out there already. Specifically, like, for instance, the fact that Prophecy of Dragons is a fantasy-based adventure as opposed to the previous two adventures, which were more in modern times, give or take some decades. Okay? The other half of this review, which I will clearly delineate as best I can, is totally spoilers. It's only for people who have already played through this adventure and want to commiserate with someone else and compare notes, see how opinions can vary or line up. Or if you have no intention of ever playing this game because you have no interest in it, or you totally write it off because of the very nature of its system, you might be interested in the spoiler part of this as well. So hopefully I won't have to explain myself this much in each of the subsequent reviews, but this is going to be the way going forward. I think it's the best way to handle it, but we'll see. Let me know. So let's talk about the Prophecy of Dragons. So the first one was called Asylum. The second one was called the Marcy case. And I would say that both of those were relatively short. That's one of the complaints people have about it. About the system in general, is that each adventure isn't really that long. You can complete it in 2 to 4 runs, I would say, on average. And while I don't want to give any spoilers for those either, both of them took place in somewhat modern times, and with, obviously some extra normal things going on, as you might expect in a time-traveling story, but for the most part sort of grounded in an earthly narrative. Prophecy of Dragons throws all that out the window. As you might expect from dragons being in the title, this is a fantasy-based version, and the whole premise is that in the T.I.M E Stories multiverse, you can either go backwards in time in the same universe, or you can go to parallel dimensions in other worlds, and that's where you end up in the Prophecy of Dragons. This is all known information. And one of the things I'll say right off the bat, every mod of T.I.M E Stories has different artwork. The artwork in both of the first two, Marcy Case and Asylum, were great. Awesome. Love it. Compared with the artwork of just the game in general, like the base set and the board and the bits and all that, just fantastic. The artwork in A Prophecy of Dragons blows it all away. It's amazing artwork. This is from, and I cannot believe I am blanking on the gentleman's name right now. I should have made a note of this. I'm very, very sorry. But it's the same person who did, I'll put a note at the screen. It's the same artist who did the artwork for Discoveries, Lewis and Clark, a little game I like called Dragon Run, lots and lots of other games, and it is wonderful. It looks fantastic. His artwork really lends itself to a fantasy style more than anything else. He's also did the artwork for, like I said, Lewis and Clark, which is more of historical, but a fantasy setting is where it can really, I think, shine. And without giving too much away, there's lots of opportunities for him to have really beautiful vistas and just wide panning shots of artwork, so to speak, in this set, and it looks amazing. I almost recommend this just for that. But fortunately, there's a lot of other things to recommend this mod for as well. And I can't stress enough how different this one feels. First off, Prophecy of Dragons is just meatier. There is so much more stuff, at least the perception of more stuff going on in this one. And a lot of it I can't really talk about because of the spoilers, but this feels as if the system has kind of come to a head. Like, this is what it's been building up to show the full potential of this Time Stories system. In other words, the first two were just sort of like intros, like, get your feet wet. You know, figure out how the game is going to work, get comfortable with it, and then just throw a big bomb down, and here's all of this that you could potentially have with this system. That's what it feels like to me. This is the first time where the group I was playing with started throwing things around like, wow, people could like make their own stuff for this. I mean, this is such a flexible system, and because that's what people thought about as they were playing through this mod, the different things that they could do. And it's tough for me. I want to talk about very specific things that I can't talk about in this half of the review. But of course, when you're talking about a fantasy type system, you know there's going to be a lot of extra things that you're just not going to do in a mod that takes place in 1992 America. You just know that it's going to be different. And I think that Prophecy of Dragons really embraces that and has just so many different things that you can do. One thing I will say, so in each Time Stories adventure, you choose a different character, right? Everyone has an allotment of characters that they can all choose from. There's no limitation. People just decide what they want to play. And then when you go on future runs, you can change them out if you want. No big deal. Same thing here, but I will make the argument that the character choice in Prophecy of Dragons is so important to the adventure. So much more so than the previous two. I had the sense in Asylum and in the Marcy case that, yeah, okay, on future runs, you can say, well, this person's better suited to this. We need more of a combat beast as opposed to someone who's got better, I think in Asylum, you had social abilities, things like that. In this one, very clearly, how you go through the game, how easy it is going down certain paths, how hard it is going down other paths, how you can skip certain things or not skip certain things, totally and utterly dependent on the characters that you choose. Whole entire branches really cannot be accessed, at least easily, depending on the characters that you have. And by the way, it might sound like I'm being critical here. Absolutely not. I love it. I love that. I love the fact that now you feel distinct and important and powerful depending on the characters that you choose. Some of them I like more than others. You have all this typical fantasy tropes being represented and some unusual ones as well, but all of them have their own particular style of play, pluses and minuses, and I really appreciated that way more than I did in the other two mods. I would say that this one is also much more difficult, probably because of how much meatier that it is. And again, this is like everything else was kind of felt like training wheels compared to this. It took us, I think it was like 5 runs to get through it, which is embarrassing compared to how many times it took us for the other ones. And I'll be upfront and say that as the reviewer in the group, I was kind of forcing the rest of the team to make choices that were suboptimal so that I could see other aspects of the game, because I just wanted to explore everything I possibly could before I did the review. So that's not going to be everyone's experience. But I still think it's going to take you more than it did on average with the first 2 runs, because it just feels heavier to me. It really does. It feels like you have such a tighter restriction and so very specifically have to do what you have to do. And again, I am not bashing the game for that. I do think that the game has, if I can be negative, some of the same problems that it had with the base mod and with the Marcy case, which is to say that, again, well, in general, if people were upset with the replayability of this game, just because there's more stuff in this mod, that's not going to change the fact that once you're through it, and that's the end of that. I also think that now there is an updated version of the rulebook out, which I actually haven't looked at. I didn't really know that, and I was coasting along with the older one. But hopefully it clears up some of the ambiguity, because we had to actually look online at some of the spoiler-free frequently asked questions for this mod. Because again, Time Stories likes to keep it vague in some areas, which sometimes a bit too vague. And I was a little disappointed in that. So those are some of the general problems with Time Stories that seem to be more pronounced here because of how much more stuff and how much more time you have to spend with this adventure. But otherwise, I really, really enjoyed this. A side note too, people were upset, some people were upset that the first 2 mods were a little bit too dark and mature. Personally, I love that, because it was another thing that set it apart from so many other family-friendly games that are on the market. I would say this one is family-friendly. I would say if you're comfortable with your family and friends that you play with watching Lord of the Rings movies, you're fine. You're totally fine, without going into any other specifics. It's just, it's just nothing that gratuitously gory or no nudity or anything like that. So I would maybe PG rated, but barely. So don't worry about that. So other than that, I just think this is... I have notes. I'm sorry. I have notes. I'll admit it. I never do notes for my reviews, but I have a lot of notes for this one. But yeah, I just think this is a solid entry in the series, and I'm curious if future entries will follow this template of amount of content and things like that. Also speaking in vagaries. But really, really enjoyed this one. Okay, so that is that for the spoiler-free section of the review. From here on out, it's going to be nothing but spoilers. So if you don't want to be spoiled on anything, stop and go and watch one of my other many excellent reviews and videos. Ha ha ha. Thanks.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Okay, final warning. The only people that should be watching right now are people who don't care at all about getting spoilers for this game, or people who have already played through all of Prophecy of Dragons and don't care. Also, I'm going to swear, just because I feel like it. This mod was a complete mindfuck. I was not expecting it to go in this direction at all. So when you open up the box, you see the extra pack of cards, and you're like, mystery, like, ooh, what could that possibly be? But I was of a mind that, what could it really be adding, right? It's probably just like some magical weird items and stuff that integrates fully into the main adventure here. So whatever, sure, it's probably cool, but I'm not, not concerned about it. Not realizing that by the time we already had gone through 4 or 5 runs of the game and finally completed the trial at the end with the portals, we're like, okay, we're halfway done? It's crazy. Now, the second half, not even half, I'd say it's the last third of the game, because the ending part didn't seem as long, and we were able to get through it in one shot, fortunately, on that final run. But it didn't seem nearly as long as the rest of it, but it's still a ton of content. And it was just a crazy amount of stuff. And I wasn't prepared for it. But I love it. I love the fact that they are really fleshing this out into this huge thing. And especially that you have like this dark secret war that they're alluding to between these Scions or Cyans. I don't know how to pronounce it. It's spelled weird. I'm pretty sure that was a race in Babylon 5, though. And no, but you have this secret war between this race of other time-hopping people, time and dimension-hopping people, and the Consortium. And I'm sure that eventually it's going to come down to, oh, wait a minute, the people you're working for are actually kind of evil, or, and so are they, kind of, and whose side are you really on? And I love that they're adding those little elements into it, that there is an overarching mythology, like how you're watching the X-Files, at least the good episodes of the X-Files, and there's Monster of the Week stuff, which is what the mods are, but then in Time Stories. But then there's an overarching thread of stories going through all of them. So I really appreciate that. And this mod definitely felt like that came to the forefront. With temporal anomalies, the whole thing with how you're going through the final dungeon, and you hit these time warps, and you're like fighting samurai, and all. There's just this is where I talked about how in the beginning, how the artwork was so beautiful, because you definitely see that here. How there's the cowboy scene that's just there. You just stumble through the cowboy world and just leave. There's cool parts where like you run into like a random World War II soldier, and there's some person there who might be alluding to the first mod, but I can't remember, with Dr. Hyacinth. Was that from the first mod? I don't remember. Who you just run into and then he walks away. Little bits like that add so much fun theme to it. And it's not just a tacked on thing. You don't know if you're going to flip over that card and have to fight or what. And instead you just find that, and that's just a neat thing. I'm only focusing on the second half, by the way, but the first half was crazy in and of itself. I have mixed feelings about how many crazy paths you could go down to get to the same thing. And that's why I think it took us so many runs, because I was forcing my group to basically try all these weird things like, well, okay, like really, if we had just done the same thing we did in the first mod again, exactly the same, but taking efficiency into mind now, like, okay, we can skip this and skip this and skip this, we probably could have gotten through it in 2 runs, because it's just like, okay, we know we need to go to the Chamberlain's office, fight through some dudes, no problem, just take the combat monsters and we're good to go. But instead we're like, wait a minute, there was fairies. There was a fairy in a cage. What's that? And then we're like, oh, you must just have to go and trade this to this person and this leprechaun, and then he sends us on, right? No. Then you're on a fairy hunt. And it's like, no, we should have done this before because we weren't looking for the fairies at all. So that run was a waste. There was no way we were going to have time looking for the fairies because we didn't know where they were. Is it at the docks? No. So that whole thing was crazy. And then you could decide, hey, I'll just teleport you in, but you should have some mages. And the limbo thing, so we're like, well, let's try that. All these really interesting things and ways to go. And then we're like, okay, wait a minute. We don't really need every glyph, right? We can buy the orb and have 2 glyphs. And then we're like, wait a minute, no, we should play it safe and have 3 glyphs. Which we did on our last run. And fortunately, that enabled us to trade them in. There was like some crazy dude from the 21st century who traded, well, I don't know. Not everyone necessarily did everything, so I'm not sure I want to spoil every single little bit, because even if you've gone through it once, you may not have explored every single nook and cranny. I will say that hopefully you found cubes, and I'm still wondering what those are about. I was worried that we might have missed one. I didn't go back and look because I don't want to spoil it for myself too much, but the thing says 3 of 9. I'm like, should there be 3? I don't know. We've only got the 2. But yeah, that's crazy. The final battle was insane, where you've got the multiple different people out there, and it's like, well, you could either, luckily we spread out, but because the first person went to the warp, we sent our wizard, and it was like, okay, this is kind of crazy. I have to try and shut this down, but then dice are getting locked. But if you wipe out the guys and we get to unlock our dice, what would have happened if we did it in reverse? Because it didn't seem to... We just happened to do it that way. If we had not done that, I would think you'd be pretty unlikely to win the game. Because you need to be able to kill the guys and unlock your dice. But I don't know. Maybe it's not as hard as it's really made out to be. But we did go there with very few equipment, and we're still able to win. But I felt like it was by the skin of our teeth and some lucky rolls. We had some very unlucky rolls with the thief. I would place the argument that in our last run we didn't even take the thief, because we're like, oh, the thief, we'll just steal the stuff, so we don't need that much gold. We get the glyphs that one of the glyphs can be stolen. Yeah, no problem, easy peasy. The thief was useless. The thief, so many times, no matter who played him, just rolled horribly and couldn't steal. Starts off with the least amount of gold. I think it's 4 for 4 players. I don't know. By the end of it, we're like, the thief is just a red herring. Like, he's supposed to throw you off. The assassin is better, even though she works better with the thief, because she gets 9 gold at least. I like the 2 different combat characters, but again, like I said in the beginning, choice of character matters so important. So you can kind of choose between the paladin and the dwarf if you want to go down that one path of the combat, but you really need that mage, I think. We actually were downplaying the Hobbit's usefulness at first, but then we're like, wait a minute. The whole thing of reusing the potions, very, very cool and useful. Because that's another thing, too, is that you see all these items in the market, and it's just, like, really obvious, like, hitting you on top of the head, foreshadowing, like, why are there scrolls and potions of fireproofing? Okay, these are going to be useful. So the game is kind of like, hey, buy these. And it gets more useful if you buy the potions and then you reuse them. But if you do the scrolls, you can just kind of use them. It requires a check, and it's not necessarily guaranteed. Although renewing the potions isn't guaranteed either, but I don't know. It seemed to be the better way for us to go in our last run. So yeah, there's just a lot of interesting things going on in this one. I love the whole overarching story. It was super difficult for us. I'm curious if other people had it. Maybe we were just retards. I don't know. That's a bad word. I shouldn't say that. Less intellectually stable people. I made notes, but that's the gist of it. I thought the whole thing was very fun. I thought it was a ton of content. Of course, you can still only play through it once, but whatever. I can imagine myself definitely wanting to play through this again in a couple of years, and I wouldn't necessarily say that about the first 2. But this one felt like there was so much content and so many different ways to go, especially if the other people you play with haven't played it before, that it could feel like a fresh experience to you. And again, it can't stress enough how beautiful it is and how much the theme really comes out. So I really liked it. I'm very curious to see what the rest of you thought about it and all of its little twists and turns and all the different routes and the glyphs, and did you take a chance and not take that many glyphs and just get lucky? Like in the Marcy case, we got lucky on our second run, and just said, we've only got one girl and we don't have time, so we just have to go for it and hope that we're right. And we were right. So we got lucky there and we're able to end it in 2 runs. But something like that might happen in this one, but it's more likely that you're going to have more runs. But for me, it was a joy the whole time. This was just a lot of fun, and I love that this is the new way that the system's going to be, and hopefully going forward it keeps this epic scale. So that is the spoiler review, along with the non-spoiler review of A Prophecy of Dragons Time Stories. I highly recommend any bit of Time Stories you can play. Definitely one of the most innovative games I have ever played, perhaps the most innovative. Highly recommended. Thanks for watching. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon. And make sure to check out our sponsor, Board Game Bliss, where you can find an amazing selection of games from around the world. BoardGameBliss.com. Thanks for your support.